Hello and welcome to the We Are Power April webinar. My name is Simone and today we are talking about one of the most discussed topics around imposter syndrome. And over the next 45 minutes, we are going to bring to you some of the insights and guidance from across our community. And we want to help you, want to pass over some advice, top tips, guidance on how to recognize it and how to combat the effects of imposter syndrome. And we all want to be able to pass on these actionable insights. So, thank you for joining us for lunch, or if you're catching up with a cup of tea later on. But we want to pass on some of that skills and knowledge so that you can take it away and put it into your world from today. And that's what today's all about. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with our stellar panel. We've already started the conversation 15 minutes ago in our virtual green room. And I am delighted today to be joined by them. If you've got any conversations to join in today, or any questions to join in the conversation, please do join the conversation, #WeArePower, wherever you're watching today, or drop a note in the chat for us and we will do our best to get back to you with either a response, a comment, or some top tips, as we say. So please do make the use of the chat box. You should be able to see that on your screen now. But without further ado, I want to bring in our wonderful panel. We've got Ngozi, we've got Kate, and we've got Sophia, and I'm going to hand over to them to give us they're so accomplished, every single one of them. I don't know how we're going to do a bite-sized intro, but let's start with you, Ngozi. Welcome to our April webinar on imposter syndrome. Oh, Ngozi, you are on mute. Oh, you are not on mute. Do you know what, Ngozi? We'll sort your tech out and we'll come back in a second. Sophia, can I come to you first? Is that okay?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You are all there. I think Ngozi was there just not 2 seconds ago, but we'll come back to you in a second. Sophia, welcome to today's pod. What's your name? Where'd you come from, other than Sophia?
So, Sophia Ali. I'm the proud owner of Minx Consulting. I run a consultancy business that does ISOs. I also moonlight a lot, so I've had various jobs, including working on the Watchtower program in the Northwest for the Northwest Aerospace Alliance, and currently working as a consultant to help a small business based in Leigh called 3D360, who do 3D printing, and I'm just doing some work with them to get their business off as they're in a high growth period. So exciting times as it is, and my hat is many, and it's great to be on this webinar today about imposter syndrome.
Oh, thanks, Sophia. And you're joining us from the wonderful county of Yorkshire today, aren't you?
I am indeed. I'm in South Yorkshire. The sun is shining really gloriously outside.
And that's what we always want to know. We always want to know where you're joining the call from today. So please let us know where you're coming. Obviously, if the sun is shining, let us know that too. Kate, welcome. Thank you for joining the chat today.
No, thank you very much for having me. So Kate Robertson. So I'm actually joining the call from London today, but having travelled down from North Yorkshire, where the sun was shining this morning, and it was definitely sad to leave to come to the city today. So I currently work for BAE Systems, where I'm what's called the Enterprise Enablement Director for a 6th generation combat aircraft. Now, what that actually means is I'm responsible for building the machine that will end up building the machine. My background is I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, but I've spent the last 10 years specialising in digital and large-scale digital transformations across the public sector. So this role brings the two of those together. I live in North Yorkshire with my 5 children and my partner, and I'm delighted to be on this call because I think imposter syndrome applies as much to motherhood as it does careers.
Absolutely, 100%. Ngozi, can we hear from you right now?
I hope so. I've changed my mic. Hey, fantastic. Tech is brilliant when it works. So hi, my name's Ngozi. I am co-founder and director of Aurora, which is a culture change consultancy based in Manchester. I'm calling you from a slightly sunny Sale. Yes, and we're focused on making the workplace work for everybody by making it the kind of place where you're happy to be. You can show up and be yourself. Imposter syndrome is something we've coached hundreds of women, literally hundreds and hundreds of women through this. And it's not uncommon, but it doesn't have to hold you back. And I'm so excited to share some of the experiences we've had and some of the learnings we've learned with you today. So thank you for having us on.
So tell us, let's Ngozi, what is it? I think Sophia and I were chatting in the green room prior, and the fact that I think we probably, between the four of us, have all kind of been aware of it and known it probably for years, decades, right at the very start, but we didn't give it a name. But
no,
we have now. So how would you define it?
Okay, it is not a medical condition, right? It's not something you can go to the doctor and say, oh, I think I've got imposter syndrome. They will just look at you like you need to go somewhere else. But it is a psychological phenomenon, right? And it's quite specific. So a lot of people use it very generally, but psychological phenomenon that reflects the belief that you're, for whatever reason, you feel inadequate, incompetent, not up to the job, or in other words, a fraud or an imposter. And here's the critical bit: despite evidence to the contrary, right? So even though there is absolutely zero proof that you aren't capable of doing the thing that you've been asked to do, you just feel that they're going to find out that I really shouldn't be here. When I'm coaching this, I use this quote, which is my favorite quote that sums up what I think the imposter phenomenon is about. And it's from the philosopher Bertrand Russell. And it's this: the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. And I think that's what it's about. It really is nothing to be afraid of. It's generally a sign of intelligence. It's a characteristics that many high achieving individuals have had. Albert Einstein used to refer to himself as an involuntary swindler. And who's to think Albert Einstein would ever have imposter syndrome, but he did. Maya Angelou has been known to think that she should never have received the accolades that she had. So it's something that lots of people carry, but still go on and achieve great things.
And you saw me desperately scribbling down there to try and get the whole of that quote down. So it's the whole problem of the world that fools and fascists are full of
fools and fanatics are
fools
so
and fanatics. Sorry.
Yeah, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. And to me, that really resonated. It did. I think the way I describe it is, I know enough to know that I can't possibly know it all. Therefore, there's always the chance that I'm wrong. But then I think of other people who I think of certain politicians, I'll let you imagine who, maybe orange colored, who are just absolutely 100% absolutely sure that they are right. There is no room for error. And you think, why? Because you're clearly wrong.
And just Kate, building on that, like Ngozi said, this isn't something you go to the doctors to get diagnosed with, right? And equally, you talked about Albert Einstein there as well. This isn't just a problem that impacts women, right? Even though there's probably a high propensity of people that you've coached that are women and not men, Ngozi, I would imagine, around this subject. But what do you think that difference is, Kate, between the syndrome and equally just being aware of where you can do better? I suppose that's self-criticism.
Yeah, and I think it's for me, the difference is if it stops you doing things. So I think that whole self-awareness, I think, is really, really important, because we all want to stay on a learning journey, and learning throughout our careers is one of the most valuable things we can possibly do. So building that understanding and having that slight uncertainty, so you do go out and you speak to other people, and also stretching yourself, going into roles where you do feel uncomfortable, and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is how we grow and how we develop. I think the key in terms of when it becomes a negative from that perspective is when it stops you doing things. So if it stops you applying for that role that actually you could definitely do with the experience you've got, if it stops you reaching for that promotion, if it stops you taking on that project, if it stops you talking out in meetings, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's when it becomes that element of the syndrome for me, is when it has that negative impact on your life. I think if you can overcome that and actually still do those things, that's when I actually think those feelings that we associate with imposter syndrome can actually be a real drive to do better. Because I think, we spoke about it before, but absolutely nailed it, that collaboration is actually the way to deliver things. I love that Aboriginal quote that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that slight uncertainty and that slight apprehension makes you really aware. It makes you listen better, and it makes you a better leader and a better manager and a better teammate. So I think there are massive positives to those feelings, but we have to really be aware of when those feelings are stopping us doing something. And that's the bit we need to overcome.
Is that awareness bit? Not there. Notice what you're talking about is that if it stops us, if it stalls us, if it stops us, or if it silences us, I feel like if it's doing that, then that's kind of a way to know, right? And Sophia, what do you think some of those factors are that contribute? I know Kate's just highlighted some of those: the stall, the stop, the silence. Anything that we've missed there in our basket of, going en route to diagnosis?
So for me, it's always been about environment. When you start out, I mean, I'll talk about myself in this instance. I was very young, very interested in playing hockey. Yeah, you've got that team spirit, the team around you. Failure and success are both celebrated different ways because it's to get a positive outcome for the team. Yeah, and your mindset is geared towards that. As a result of playing those kind of team sports, you feel more confident. And therefore, as you start on your journey and your career, you feel that you can achieve lots. And in your head, you probably have some kind of level where if you get to that first stage level, you've achieved something. And beyond that then becomes a scary nightmare. And for me, that's really what happened. I was very confident in my younger years, really excelled, charted C's, anything that anybody didn't want to do, Sophia did it. And I moved really quick, very, very quickly through the ranks. And then I just came to this stalemate. And my biggest problem was I didn't understand what mentoring was about and how you could have people support you. So I didn't have the right mentor to turn to start to discuss some of the feelings that I was having. And as a result, I came to this point where all of a sudden the brakes hit and all of the imposter syndrome started coming out. I was very much an OCD perfectionist type of person. And I always found it really useful in my jobs because they were all about manufacturing, getting things right, the quality side of aspect of it. So it was a tool and a superpower. But then all of a sudden you go into management and that superpower is not quite the same thing anymore. And all of a sudden, as everybody else has just mentioned, that next job, the next role, I can do it. But have I got the confidence to do it? No. Do I feel that everybody will think I'm a fake in the room? Yeah. Even coming on today, I felt, am I going to be alongside some other women who are these super women? Yeah, as you will testify, Simone, I've been nominated for the Northern Women Power Award for Mentor of the Year for 3 years running. So I can't be an imposter. But that feeling does not go away. Yeah, that feeling of being in the room, just basically, it's like almost somebody's taking the oxygen away out the room.
I'm sure a lot of people can resonate here. I'm just going to quickly jump into the chat. Yes, this is being recorded today, so you can catch up later, or hopefully you managed to join us now, Stephanie. Kate, how do we turn this imposter syndrome into a positive or kind of real kind of force for motivation? Surely it doesn't always have to be negative.
No, absolutely. And I think, it comes down to aspects we've already talked about in terms of coaching and mentoring. But I also think it comes about from, just saying yes sometimes. And that feeling, that feeling you get in your stomach, that's like butterflies that you get before you walk into a meeting or before you do anything. I still get it, even if I've been on holiday for 3 weeks or away from work. That first day at work still feels like that first day of primary school when you were younger, and you're filled with that anxiety of, am I going to know what I'm talking about still, or will they have found out, so to speak? And it's getting used to that feeling and being able to channel that feeling into, actually, I know that this is how I feel, and I know that this is how I feel every time. And I know that if I take one step forwards, that the next step will be easier, and that actually that feeling will start to settle because I do know what I'm talking about. And I think a lot of it for me is often, we talk about imposter syndrome, having that evidence to the contrary. It's really important that we understand our own evidence. And I used to spend a lot of time actually telling myself those bits of evidence before walking into a room or into an interview, or those elements, so that you are almost being your own coach and your own cheerleader on the sidelines. I think the other thing is having that group of support around you, like talking to my partner, my friends, all of those aspects, and using those people to help you overcome those challenges. But I also think it's recognizing and it's being aware that not every day is a good day, and that there will be days where actually things will go wrong, and they will reinforce those feelings that you're in the wrong place and you're not quite up to the task. And it's really important we don't let those days knock us back again completely, and we actually use them to learn and to grow and to reflect and to get stronger in them. And I mean, it's taken me years to go through that journey. At the beginning of my career, the way I would have been talking now, I'd have been like, well, if anyone doubts you, you fight. I was a complete fighter. It's like if people said I couldn't do something, I'd be like, well, I'm going to prove them wrong. And, back to Sophia's bit about being a bit of a perfectionist, I turned that into, almost being just really aggressive about how I approached my whole career. It's like, I'm going to prove everything wrong. And I didn't leave that space for that reflection and that growth. And I think, as you progress through your career and through roles, you have to learn that, because you can't keep hold of everything, because it does in the end overwhelm you, and you have to avoid that. So I think, there are key steps to take to making it positive. And I think everyone is their own cheerleader and really needs to build on that.
You are your own mentor, you are your own coach, you are your own sponsor, aren't you? It's really taking ownership of that. And Sophia, you've just talked about coming on this call today, being in a room at the awards. You have been, Mentor of the Year, short finalist. How have you used what have you used to kind of get over that fear, even today?
So I'm lucky in that I came up with a unique way of dealing with some of my job scenarios, eventually culminating in me setting up my own business. But prior to that, I ended up working in contract roles, because what I found was that doing these contract roles had a beginning, middle, and an end. And that success for me was just the right amount of drug to keep me going, and therefore taking on more and more important roles and more interesting roles. It's not for everybody. It's an interesting life choice, but that got me over a lot of them. My ideal career path, looking back at it, would have been working for a very big corporate business where I would have had the chance to do lots of things. But my confidence and my imposter syndrome always came first. That part where somebody says, Kate was mentioning going for that next job, going for that next level. I always felt safer working in SME businesses where nobody's going to find out because I'm the smartest person in the room. It's that analogy, isn't it? Do you go to a university where you're in the top 5, or do you go to Cambridge and you're in the bottom 5? Yeah, my mechanism was always to be the smartest person in the room, and therefore there's less likely chance of anybody finding out that I'm a fake in that sense. But it's had its consequences. When I talk to students now, I give them exactly the opposite, that exactly what Kate said. Make them feel that every day is success. Give them the tools to make sure that, they feel that even if something bad's happened, play it back and understand that they've learned something out of that. But we're in a society where everybody wants us to be successful. So failure becomes more and more difficult. And when you've got students who you're mentoring who have been told that, you're going to graduate with a first, you're going to get this perfect job, this perfect life. Unfortunately, life isn't like that. And therefore, I think the whole idea of imposter syndrome becomes more and more, if we don't talk about it, it becomes the elephant in the room.
And it's interesting because we do our virtual power up sessions every month where we're talking to people at the start of their careers or undergrads or in further education. And actually the best feedback that we get is when they realize they've talked to somebody who hasn't had that miracle journey or that absolutely one linear path, because there's no such thing. And the fact that people can understand that actually you feel like this too. Someone will hear today going, oh my gosh, I couldn't do what they do today. But actually, you know what, we all have that wobble. We all have that sort of and Ngozi, you've coached and mentored like tons and tons of humans on this. what are some of those kind of real drastic impacts that you've seen that imposter syndrome has brought?
I mean, it isn't a medical condition, we've already said, but it can lead to real medical issues such as anxiety and depression and stress. I mean, for me, I spent most of my career running my own business with these imposter feelings, not knowing the name, just feeling like one day they're all going to figure out that I shouldn't be here. And sometimes things would happen that reinforced that belief, and sometimes things would happen that absolutely didn't. And in the end, it did have the impact of causing great stress and anxiety. It did diminish my shine, if you want to put it that way. And I stopped putting myself forward for promotions and things like that. That it can have real consequences if you allow it to, but it doesn't have to, because you can do exactly what the other panelists were suggesting, which is to learn to do. I love the Suzanne Jeffers quote, which is feel the fear and do it anyway. You can learn to do that, and it takes time. You will never necessarily get away with never feeling these imposter feelings again if you're a person prone to imposterism, but you can learn to recognize them early and learn how to harness those feelings, which is what I think you were touching on earlier.
Oh, Simone, I think you're on mute.
Such a pro. Are there any sort of personal practice? We're talking about this in one of our last webinars, the kind of intention of practice, but are there any sort of daily exercises or practice that can help us tackle that, Ngozi?
Absolutely. We at Aurora, we train a kind of a 3-step approach, because me and my ADHD can't remember all the 3 things in a row. And it's pause. First of all, stop. Because just the first thing I want everybody to remember is, just because you feel like an imposter or a fraud, just because you feel like you shouldn't be doing it, just because you feel like a fake, doesn't mean that you are. Those are just feelings. They are not fact, right? That's the very, very first step to being able to overcome it. Just accepting that it doesn't have to be true. So when you get that feeling of, oh my God, they're going to find out I shouldn't be here, or whatever the thought is that comes to your mind, just stop. Take a second and think, just because I'm thinking this doesn't make it a fact. It might not even be your voice that you're hearing. You were talking earlier, Simone, about where do these things come from? And like most good hang-ups that we have as grown-ups, it probably comes from childhood. Maybe from the way your parents or your teachers or your peers used to talk to you when you were younger. Maybe well-meaning things, even like criticism, like, oh, I know you can do better than that, and things like that just stick in our head. Whose voice are you hearing when you're thinking that? That's the first thing. And then that's when you need to gather your evidence. Just as you were saying, it really helps if you've got evidence to prove whether or not that thought that you have that you're inadequate is true. So for me, the daily practice I used to do in my old life, when I used to work in corporate, was, because I was having these feelings all the time, and because I know I have, like most people, a negativity bias from myself, I tend to hold on to criticism and dismiss compliments. That makes it very, very difficult to internalize and really believe in my own ability. So what I did was, anytime anybody sent a complimentary email, whether it was congratulations on that last job, or you were fantastic at the presentation, or thank you very much for stepping in and helping out, whatever it was, I would file that in a folder called Feel Good. any positive criticism, compliments I'd get, I would keep a record of it, because I know that my mind would just not remember that in the time of need. So start building up your evidence to show this is what you can do. This is what you're capable of. These are the problems that you've already overcome. So use that evidence to determine whether or not it's true that you're an imposter or not. And then from that basis of fact, not the feeling that you had, that is when you act and make a decision.
Love it. Pause, stop, look at the evidence, then make the decision. So you're doing it. I suppose it's like we do in our day-to-day jobs, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we're working on a project, we're dealing with a problem. That's exactly what we do. We need to bring that back into it. It's about, like Kate says, it's being your own mentor, your own coach, your own sponsor. It's bringing that back in. It's interesting. I go back way back into sort of when I was working down in London town, and we used to do these regular networking gatherings. And there's an amazing young woman. I thought she had it all, you know, literally always came in with this smile of positivity. And after one of these sessions, she's like, I'd love to write a blog about how I feel, etc. And I'm like, absolutely. And the title of her blog was Being Me is Good Enough. And it was that, you know, everyone just assumes that I have it, that I'm, you know, winning at life, but actually I have this real challenge about, and it wasn't called imposter syndrome then, but almost playing it dress up, pretending to be someone I'm not. And she sort of took it away and brought her own Gabriella into the workplace and now is working globally and happy. Because actually it doesn't always work the same, but you know, something really important. Kate, what have you had any real sort of personal experience with this throughout your career?
Yeah, so I started my career in the Royal Navy as an air engineering officer, and I actually had my first child, Lilia, who's now 17, when I was under training, which meant at the point where all of my colleagues kind of went straight into their first jobs, having just finished all their training, I took a year out for maternity leave, and then went and joined a job where I didn't know the aircraft. It wasn't the aircraft I'd trained on. And I have to admit, I was petrified that first kind of morning walking in. You know, I was I'd never done a job before. You know, there were obviously people on the squadron who had been maintaining that aircraft and understood it for years. And I remember I walked into the maintenance office, and there was a warrant officer there, and his name was Ian Stamp. And he'd been in, you know, almost 20 years and essentially was kind of old and bold military, exactly how do you expect. And I had absolutely convinced myself that he would immediately see through me. He wouldn't want me in there. He was going to make my life really difficult because I didn't understand any of what I was doing. And I'd almost got myself into, you know, a bit of a panic attack with it. And I remember stopping outside the corridor and just making myself breathe. And it goes back a lot, linking to what you said, Simone, about kind of playing dress up. And I actually, in that moment, did exactly that. And I said, you know, to myself, right, what you're going to do is you're going to pretend. You're just going to pretend. Do the whole fake it until you make it. And I walked in, and as I walked in, he was sat there. And immediately, our boss, the air engineering officer, and he sat down with his back to Ian Stamp, and I sat down opposite him, and he started firing these questions at me, you know, about the aircraft type, about how it worked, about all kinds of things. It was utterly overwhelming. And I saw this warrant officer starting to write behind him, and then he just started holding up the answers behind the air engineering officer's head. And so, you know, just step by step holding them up for me. And then the last one he held up was just one that said, "You've got this." And in that moment, you know, I spent another 18 months working with him and learned a massive amount from him. But that just completely changed my perspective. And you know, going back to what Ngozi was saying about, you know, always thinking of those feel good things, you know, from that moment forwards, whenever I was feeling the same, like I used to be petrified of public speaking and would get the butterflies and shaky leg syndrome and start squeaking. That was always what I thought back to in terms of, you know, I had been convinced that he was going to see straight through me, but actually all he wanted to do was support me. And I think that's another thing when we think about imposter syndrome, is actually most people want you to succeed. So when we're nervous, ask for help, because more people will help, and they'll see you for the skills you have, not the skills you don't have. We are so bad at seeing ourselves for what we don't have instead of what we do. Whereas most people, not all, we've all had the odd toxic leader in our time, most people will absolutely see you for the positives and help support that. And so I think the other aspect of that resilience and that getting past it is that asking for help bit and asking for that support.
Wow, what a phenomenal experience in many ways. Warrant Officer Ian Stamp, did you say, was that his name, Kate?
That was his name, yeah.
High five, be more Ian. I mean, that brings into all manner of form of fantastic allyship and advocacy, and literally just having your back, not wanting you to go down any kind of rabbit hole. I love that. I love Ian right now. I'm just going to put it out there. Or Mr. Stamp, who say the Royal Navy. Sophia, I mean, we talked about, I think that's a real kind of sponsorship approach, isn't it? If you like, that's someone who's like kind of gone out. I just love the idea of holding the sign up. What part do you think sort of sponsorship, mentoring, coaching can really build in to sort of tackling imposter syndrome?
I think it's really important to have somebody who you can talk through things with. Yeah. Whether it is that coaching approach or whether it is the mentoring approach, for each individual, it's different, and the person you pick is different, and how you tackle it is also unique to how your needs are, or what you actually need out of it. But I always found, I mean, it's interesting. Ngozi mentioned something about having the right person and how they actually made you feel. I had a boss who, amazing man by the name of Rod Taylor. He was an OBE, MBE. And one of the things Rod used to say to me was, you don't actually like that whole being praised bit. So he came up with a unique idea. Every time I did something, he'd leave a bottle of champagne on my desk. It became a statement. Yeah, everybody knew that I'd achieved something. Everybody knew the teams who had been involved with me had achieved something. And he stopped talking to me about being, a pat on the back, or whether it was that positive email, etc. And I found that at first, why is he doing this? It was mental. But then I realized it was just that whole thing, that it was that silent praise. And that's what I needed. And it just became an ongoing joke with everybody around me. The business that I worked in, it's an electronics business based in Peterlee. And it was just amazing how, for me, that was the right bit of praise. Yeah. And it was just what I needed to get over whatever it was that was my problem. And I carried on for years and years and years, wishing that everybody would just stop telling me it and just do something more down to earth in how to praise me. Yeah. If it was just a thank you rather than that whole big open statement about it. And it all boils down to, I'm an Asian girl, first generation, born here. I wasn't used to that kind of praise. So when I started getting it and when people started telling me what I'd achieved, I just couldn't work out how to deal with it. And I think a lot of people feel that praise sometimes, even though you want it, even though it's what you actually need, given to you by certain people, you take it in one way, given to you by other people, that makes your whole imposter syndrome even worse, because you feel that bar's been set. And for me, that perfectionism, OCD, also created a whole, another layer to it. And so for me, the environment is really important in a business. You've got this culture where people can be themselves and they're not forced to do things that maybe the company wants to do. Everybody can't fit into that world. And that doesn't mean that you don't work at that business, because your unique superpower adds something else. I'm a big, most of my career has been around innovation. And to be innovative, you've got to be a little bit creative, a little bit out of the box, as it were. I used to say to everybody who I used to find within a business who's creative. And you can't have those people doing their clever stuff if they're fitting into a box of culture, values, mission statements, and all the rest of it. It doesn't mean that they don't fit in there. It's just they need something different.
I think something you said about that, it's sometimes how the way that praise can be given. I think a lot of this sits down to it having the culture of which that environment is, but equally the intent in which it's served up as well. Sometimes you're like, doesn't feel very authentic. We've got a couple of questions actually. Mel, is this a female only issue? And Ngozi, I know at the start, I know you have mentored and coached women through this, but is it women only? You talked about Albert Einstein, so clearly not.
No, it's definitely not, but it is something that women tend to struggle with. And by struggle means not that they have the feelings necessarily more often, but that it holds women back more frequently, and it can have a more negative impact on a woman's life. And the reason for this, psychologists have been thinking about it, but it seems to fall in the fact that women, for whatever reason, that is to do with social conditioning and the way we're brought up, we tend to internalize fault or blame, right? So somebody criticizes us, we take it wholeheartedly. Men tend to externalize fault or blame. They receive criticism, it's that person's problem. And I always illustrate that with a story that actually happened to me. It's true. And this, my poor long-suffering husband has had this story shared so many times. But for example, if after Christmas, I go to put on my favorite pair of jeans and they're just a bit too snug, and I'm having to do that whole thing of lying back on the bed and doing the zip up like that, I'm just thinking, why did you go for the second helping? And then the third and the fourth, why? That's my first thought. It's my fault. But my husband, when he went to put on his shorts that he hadn't worn in several years, when they were a bit snug, his first instinct was to say, Ghazi, did you wash this at 40 or 30? Because you know it should have been done at 30. That is a classic example. And if obviously as women, we tend to take on criticism as if it is 100% true and 100% ours, but not the same with compliments, it would be easy to see why, just as you were explaining, Sophia, why you feel uncomfortable. If you're not used to handling praise, then you can't actually process that praise as true, but you can process every criticism that you had along the way as true. And therefore, when someone's saying, why don't you apply for that position? You're thinking, well, because of all these hundreds of thousands of bad things that I've done, and you can't recall any of the good stuff, which is why I say be intentional about noting the things that you have done well, because your brain is likely to not let you remember it. But I have coached lots of men who've said, yeah, I've got that as well. So it's not exclusively women. People who are marginalized, so people of color, people from the LGBTQ plus community, and women, we tend to struggle with these, probably because of that criticism element more. I hope that explains it.
No, that's great. And I'm just picking up on a comment from Sophie as well. Sometimes we put ourselves into the fight mode, which then can exacerbate the issue. And sometimes we think people want us to do well, or that people aren't in the nicest way possible way actually bothered. I think that comes a bit to that, what you were talking about, Sophia, that authenticity and that intent of what that person said to you. Do I really see this? Are you just doing it for show?
I found that when, like Ngozi said there, people from minorities or from smaller groups who are different tend to work harder to prove themselves right. So the more chartered, the more successful. They actually have more pieces of paper behind them, which would actually suggest exactly the opposite of what imposter syndrome is. And one of the things it is really good is when you have businesses where people like to put these things on the wall. Back to when Ngozi says again, you see that success on the wall and you're proud of it. Yeah, that award sat in front of you, reminding you constantly that you're not actually the imposter. You are really here to be there. Yeah. I proudly wear my Northern Women Power Award pins all of the time, everywhere I go, because it is that reminder to me that, every time you've been nominated, you are not, you are not the imposter in the room. You are there because other people believe that, you are good enough to be in that room.
And what advice would you give to someone maybe at the start of their career, Kate, who whether they're studying or whether they're right at the start of their working for a big organization? How would you say for them to sort of tackle this? Is it the same advice that we'd give to anyone at any level? I don't know if it's any different.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think it is all wrapped up in that how you keep learning, because learning about ourselves and how we react to elements is as important as learning the technical skills for your job. And you know, I was very much like Sophie in terms of I chased certificates. You know, I've got MEng, MBA, MSc, etc., etc. But then the single thing that I did that made the biggest impact on my career and the biggest impact on my learning was actually starting to keep a reflective journal. And I started this actually as one of my MBA modules. So had to do it for 6 weeks. And I was completely dismissive of it, which I'm sure the others on the call would say actually how valuable it is. But actually in that time, just keeping that journal, which was really simple in terms of, you know, write one thing down that happened in the day, you know, what happened, what you did about it, what you might do differently in the future. So essentially, just really quickly, that not only built up my kind of muscle for that continuous learning, but also built up my self-awareness much more. So I started to pick out those things that I had done well. You know, I wasn't reliant on other people's praise. I wasn't reliant on other people's documentation and on achieving a piece of paper. I started to reflect and notice the things I did well. And sometimes they were things that I knew I'd done well that other people wouldn't have recognized. But for me, because of difficulty I'd faced or other aspects, they were those really important elements. So the one piece of advice I would give to anyone is start looking and building reflective practice into your daily, weekly drumbeat, because then you can start to pick out what you do well. And then you will, in the end, start to just automatically notice those points. And as quickly then as those feelings of imposter and fraud and, you know, I can't do this come in, those other knowledge that you've built through that practice of, but actually this is quite similar to that occasion. And I said I'd do this differently then. And actually I did that pretty damn well, comes in as well. So you end up almost with the two, the angel and the devil on your shoulders, but you've got the angel. And I think learning that ability to be able to do that for myself and not rely on that kind of external validation was a critical turning point in my career. And I wish I'd started it at university.
And that whole sort of self-reflection, create your own, be your own cheerleader. And Ngozi, and please forgive me, I've been calling you Ngozi, and how can I have done that? We've had dinner together. It's crazy, right? Ngozi, forgive me. What can organizations do out there that are beyond just an initiative, one-off thing? What can they do to really help their individuals? Because surely every organization wants their colleagues to be the best version of themselves, right? What can they do to help and support?
I mean, first of all, it's not that organizations are going to have, come here and join this imposter syndrome program, but it definitely would help to have a culture where this kind of stuff is talked about openly. The silver bullet, if you're looking for it, for overcoming, combating imposter feelings is to talk about them. And that's the one thing that your imposterism won't want you to do. I never told a single soul that I felt like I couldn't do what I was doing or I was out of my depth, because I was terrified that they might go, yeah, I always did wonder how you got in here. You are terrified of doing it, so you keep it to yourself. And I'm advising that's the last thing you should do, because fear and lies grow in secret. And actually, even us doing this webinar, more and more people will be saying, oh, I feel that too. And you're looking at them as if to say, but you're brilliant. And they're looking at you with exactly the same thing. So creating a culture that is psychologically safe, which allows people to express what they're actually feeling, is the foundation for healthy workplace where people don't struggle with imposter syndrome on their own. Mentoring is a great way to do that in practice, by people who are further along in their career talking openly with their mentees about some of the challenges that they've had to overcome, and particularly the confidence issues they've had, some of the mistakes they've made, and yet been able to power through. That's the kind of great practice that creates a culture where everybody has the potential to thrive despite these confidence issues, imposterism feelings, whatever you want to call them.
And as we head right to the top of this show, Sophia, final word with you. We were getting rid of that perfectionism. What is the one top tip you would give someone going about this webinar to put into practice right now?
So take up something that makes you fail. And therefore, you don't have that need to be that perfect person. I took up golf and pants at it, but guess what? It puts a reality check on everything that I do.
I love it. Take up something that makes you fail. Oh my gosh, that's like me doing salsa dancing. 100%. Can't do it. Fear and lies grow in secret. I can't repeat your quotation again, Nagazi, because it was just amazing. But I loved it. On your own, you can go fast, but together you can go far. I think the whole self-reflection practice piece was something and really building up your own evidence to kind of reflect and go back. Do not let anybody diminish your shine. And don't forget, take your pause, take your stop, build that evidence and take action, make the right decisions. Amazing. And I think the big thing that for me that's come out of this whole conversation today is how that links in with mentoring, allyship. It links in with all of the things that, that's kind of self-confidence, belief, well-being. None of these things sit independently. Everything kind of weaves in. So don't tackle one thing of its own if I was to give any top tip or advice or guidance. But what do I know? Actually, I know a lot. I'm not diminishing any of my shine. Much all of you for joining us today. I love these conversations. Please keep the conversation going on all of our socials, on our We Are Power channels. Use the hashtag wearepower.net. A massive round of applause. Sophia, Nagazi and Kate, thank you so much for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us today. We will see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.